Time now for Focus. And today, as French President Emmanuel Macron visits Corsica, we have a report on those demanding greater autonomy for the island. France 24's Jonathan Walsh and Clifford went to Corsica's Corte University, where many students are dreaming big now that nationalists are in an unprecedented position of political strength.
Nestled in the mountains, Corsica's only university. Local culture is closely weaved into academic life here at Corte, with Corsican language classes compulsory across all programs for its 4,600 students. This class of future teachers share a strong desire to pass on the bilingual baton.
I'd like to be a primary school teacher, but not if I can't teach Corsican, because that's how I'd be able to pass on this culture and this language and give others the opportunity that I've had.
For some, this ambition is more deeply rooted in politics.
Personally, as a separatist, I think that every country has its language, so in this case, the Corsican language. Although Corsica hasn't been recognized as a country yet, I think we need to sustain it.
A vision widely shared across Corte's corridors, and not just by students. A former nationalist deputy, Patricia, fought to revive her language and bring it to the curriculum. Teaching Corsican back in the 70s, she says, was a militant act.
Our goal was also to breathe new life into Corsica through language and culture. This was also a new political force. And today it's clear to see that at the university, the student unions are predominantly nationalist.
Hardline nationalist unions have the monopoly here, the most powerful, the Gioventù Paolina. Its members celebrate the recent success of the nationalist coalition in territorial elections, but they have their sights set on higher goals.
The nationalist victory is just a first phase because the armed conflict has been over for years now, and that's something that we can be proud of. We would start off with an autonomous status, which is of course non-negotiable and of great significance, and then move towards independence.
Outside the university's walls, the struggle for independence is deeply rooted within the surrounding town of Corte's history. This building, in particular, the Palazzi Nazionali, the centre point of the island's fleeting era of independence in the 18th century, sandwiched between Italian and French rule.
In 1755, it became the headquarters of the national government, the only one that Corsica ever had, that of Pascal Paoli, which fell in 1769.
Watching over the town, Pascal Paoli remains the poster boy for nationalism. During his brief stint, he also found time to establish a university. Refounded in his name in 1981, Corte represents the training grounds for the movement's current leaders, and likely its future ones.
If you're aiming for a political career as a nationalist, Corte University is the place to be. The progression and breakthrough of nationalist ideas was likely to have been boosted by the work and thought processes of the students and academics of this university.
The youth vote was key to the nationalists' recent victory in territorial elections, within a coalition bringing together autonomists and separatists under an agreement to seek more autonomy and put aside independence. On many students' minds here, frustration with traditional parties, a desire for cultural recognition, and fears of economic dependence on the French state.
They may be the only ones who can encompass this need for a new direction that can be felt at the heart of the Corsican society. I think that we can see the same thing on the national level. If Macron was elected, it's because of this hope for a new start.
For now, the goal is to achieve autonomy, to show that it's possible. Then we'll see if Corsica is ready for independence later. But I think today Corsicans aren't ready. Corsica isn't ready for it now.
The overriding sentiment at Corte may be clear, but topics within the nationalist cause remain sensitive. Gioventù Paolina, like the coalition, calls for the release of all jailed nationalist fighters. Debate between the union's members gets heated around Ivan Colonna, the man convicted of shooting dead regional prefect Claude Erignac in 1998.
In the case of Yvan Colonna, it was an open war, so to speak, as to whether we ought to support him or not. But now, today, there are a lot of political prisoners. And let's say it's not such an important question anymore.
I completely disagree with what's just been said. Yvan Colonna, just like the other political prisoners, will always be supported by the nationalist community, and above all, by Juventus Paulina.
The group all have some form of a community link to one of the dozen jailed fighters. But though their support for these symbolic figures is unwavering, their vision of achieving independence is a very different one. An inherited fight they want to take step by step via the negotiating table.
For more on this, I'm now joined from London by Joseph Downing. He's an expert in French politics. Hello, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, as we just heard in that report, Corsican nationalists are, in general, not calling for full independence at this point. So could you run us through what it is that they want exactly?
Well, they're quite divided. I mean, there's a more radical faction that would like full independence, but it seems that the mainstream of the Corsican nationalist movement are set on increasing Corsica's autonomy. So they basically would like increasing abilities to self-govern from the French state. So they have an inherent, as most French regions do, unfortunately, an inherent mistrust of Paris as the sort of guardian of their best interests. They see it as a bit like the Scots and the Welsh kind of see it in the UK. They see it as governing their own territory, having their own politicians, having their own abilities to make decisions will be much better for their, economic, social and political life.
Now, President Macron hasn't yet fully set out his position, but how far do you think he might be willing to accommodate nationalists?
I mean, it's quite difficult to say. I don't think he's going to go very far, to be honest, because I mean, France is heavily centralised. It's one of the most centralised countries in Europe, and it has a very bad record, actually, of granting, especially cultural rights to its national minorities. So it's neither a signatory nor a ratifying power on the Council of Europe's framework for national minorities that most other major European democracies have signed up to. They don't have the same framework for accommodating minority languages or minority religions as we do in the UK, for example. This means, I think, Macron, to be honest, is quite hamstrung by that context, and he's very unlikely to grant, huge amounts of autonomy. There's another reason behind that, because he'll be looking very closely at the Scottish and the Catalan examples, which, while very different, also demonstrate that once you let the horse out of the stable, so to speak, it's very hard to get it back in. Once you enable autonomy movements to get power into the regions, it's very difficult to stop it going all the way. It's unlikely, however, that Corsica can go all the way. A lot of people are talking about it as a sort of new Catalonia, but the differences are stark. I mean, Catalonia in Spain is is in fact the most rich region of Spain, and probably economically could support itself. I don't think the same could be said for Corsica, which really is mainly a quite poor sort of Mediterranean agricultural region.
So it doesn't contribute much then to France's GDP?
Not a huge amount. I mean, it's not a major sort of industrial region. It doesn't have, over sort of 25% of France's GDP is contributed by the Île-de-France Parisian region alone. I mean, this is not the same. This is not Corsica. It's not a regional centre of economic power like Lyon or Bordeaux or places like that. I mean, it really does have quite significant economic problems, and this is one of the reasons I suspect behind an increasing surge of support for the autonomy or the nationalist movement is an idea that these people will be able to deliver us a better growth and better opportunities, a bit like the Scottish National Party promises in Scotland. Whether or not it's able to do this is another discussion entirely. In fact, one of the sort of best things in a way for central governments to do is to grant power to nationalist movements in some ways politically, because then people do see that nationalist movements can promise the world. They can promise to sort of radically transform society and deliver economic growth and jobs and opportunities. But once they gain power And the Corsican nationalists will be watching this closely, and I think will be quite worried about this. Once they gain power, they're stuck in the same logic of the system and the same, structural problems as, more conventional politicians, really.
Do you think it's these big promises that make the nationalists so appealing to young voters? They played a key role in bringing about the power that they have now in Corsica.
Definitely, 100%. But it is a two-sided coin. On one hand, these big promises are very, very appealing to these young voters who are looking very carefully at France's poor record on youth unemployment and saying, well, the central state in Paris, those politicians who are already quite wealthy don't seem to really care about young people getting jobs. France is a country where, as a young person, to get a decent qualified job, especially in the government administration, which is a massive employer, you have to have contacts. And many young people have the education, but they don't have the contacts and therefore can't get the jobs. So the nationalist promises of that are appealing, but they're only appealing because they're in a context where established political parties, both on the left and the right, in the previous two administrations of Hollande and Sarkozy, have really failed to deliver. Both came to power saying, we're going to reform France, we're going to make things better, we're going to tackle youth unemployment, we're going to give people opportunities. And both administrations ended up leaving power with a general consensus in France. So they really just lined their own pockets.
All right, Joseph Downing, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us for today's Focus.